My talk is mostly about the business side of startups, hardware startups. So I do a quick round. Who among you is working in a hardware startup? You can raise your hand. Hardware startup. Okay. Who is working on hardware projects, like personal projects? Also, a few people. Okay. Okay. Get the idea. So maybe that will give you some ideas about how you can build a hardware company later. So my name is Benjamin Joffe. Like most of you guys, I'm from France, but differing probably from many of you, I spent over a decade in Asia. I lived in Japan, in South Korea, in China, and a few other places. Mostly worked in the web and mobile space, mostly in strategy and market research. Participated in a lot of events, and I've also founded one of my own called Mobile Monday. You also have it here. And I'm pretty active as an angel investor, and I'm also now working in hardware, helping a hardware-focused accelerator called Accelerator. Why am I in Paris? I spend most of my time between Asia and Silicon Valley, but I'm visiting friends and family, so I thought, well, I might as well check what's going on in the startup scene and more particularly the hardware scene. In addition, I'm looking for startups, in the hardware startups for Accelerator, and so I attend a lot of events to meet startups, and I meet people and a lot of companies. So I met a few hardware startups in Paris. Sadly, in low web, and there was not that very many. I think last year was better because they had a focus on Internet of Things, but this year was mostly like a couple of big companies, a couple of startups that were ready to advance for us, and almost no hardware people. Regardless, we think that 2014 is going to be the year of hardware. There was a piece on Forbes recently, title like that. I'm losing the pictures, so maybe I'll switch to the PDF. Okay. Can you help me?
Where's your accelerator?
It's based in Shenzhen. Shenzhen, China, south of China, next to Hong Kong. It's basically where the Apple factories are. And I'll explain to you why we are there and not somewhere else, and why we think it's actually mostly a good idea to do hardware from China. So yeah, hardware, you probably know most of those companies. What you might not have followed is that actually a lot of software companies are entering hardware now. Google, as you know, launched Glass. They're looking at self-driving cars. They bought a robotics company. Adidas is doing integrated devices with sports gear. Valve just announced 13 products integrating with their software. And there's a lot of very big companies who used to do software now doing hardware as well. And the biggest tech company in the world is a hardware company. It's Apple. And there's also a bunch of cool startups that are starting to do really well. So GoPro is very famous, but there's a bunch of others that are actually doing also very well, with valuations in hundreds of millions for some of them. So why is this happening, and why we think it's a hardware renaissance is because first, as you've seen with the previous presentation, prototyping is a lot easier to do now than it used to. With Arduino, Raspberry Pi, 3D printing, sensors, Bluetooth low energy, smartphones, everywhere, you can do simple hardware prototypes and connect that to computing power either in the cloud or mobile devices. So a lot of things have changed with that. In addition, the supply chain is better than ever. China in particular has the whole chain integrated, which is why most companies go there. And it's integrated, so it allows companies to do things fast, in an affordable way, and in a scalable way. There's also more funding than before. So Kickstarter is really good for early stage products, and for late stage, more VCs and more angel investors are getting interested in hardware, because they realize people actually pay for hardware, whereas it's very difficult to get them to pay for software. I'll tell you a bit about the life of a hardware startup. So this is how we kind of break it down. So you start with kind of concept, then you try to do a minimal functional prototype. It might be very ugly, but somehow does the job. Then you have the complete functional prototype where it actually looks like the way you want it to look. But once you have this, you're actually not done, because what you've done is not scalable. When you start talking with the factory to make not one, but 1,000 of them, they will tell you, oh, we can't do that. We need to change the components. this cannot be manufactured, this has to be changed. And then you will need to do your design for manufacture. Then you can go to do the first factory run, and then hopefully hit retail later. So we wrote, actually, me and the founder of Accelerator, a couple of columns on TechCrunch about what we call the lean hardware startup. So I'll just give you a short summary of one of the articles. What we call the lean hardware rules. The first one is that no hardware plan survives contact with the factory. So as long as you do prototypes on your own, everything's fine. But as soon as you want to actually productize it to sell it to more than one customer, you will need to talk to a factory, and you will need to revisit your whole plan, most likely. And this is what you can do to avoid trouble. So first is to look at designing with the right components, so components that are not too odd or too rare, but widespread enough and cheap enough, affordable enough. Understand that the prototype is actually ready when it's ready to be manufactured. Understand also that your factory is actually your most important partner. So in the first presentation, you heard a few examples of all the trouble that can happen with different types of factories and different types of people you have in factories. Because maybe they don't have internet in some of them, maybe they don't speak good English, maybe they don't understand what you're doing. So picking the factory is more important than maybe picking your co-founder. Because you will actually spend much more time talking with the factory on solving trouble there than solving the product troubles. Because once you've reached the stage where you have pretty functional prototype, a lot of the engineering, the like big overhaul of the engineering is actually done. But after that, it's all about the factory. Another thing that a lot of startups don't necessarily do very well is to understand how to be memorable, to be more clear. Yes?
Memorable to whom?
Yes, so I'm explaining to be more clear. To be clearer about that, being memorable is about finding a position, the right positioning in the market, so that people understand how different you are from the others. Because there's basically products for everything. So we mostly deal with B2C companies on projects. So that means that finding not only a brand, but also a type of product that is doing something like differently enough, not just a little bit better mousetrap, but a different way to catch mice, basically. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get noticed, or like get journalist attention, get funding, get anything. It's very, very difficult because you have a competitor who already established a reputation, and you have nothing. So it's very important. Picking the right business model is increasingly important because before connected hardware, you could just like make a whatever and just charge, like, I don't know, 3 times your bill of material, and you'd get a business running somehow. But today there's so much competition that if you just do pure hardware, it's very difficult to survive because it's very difficult to defend. So you need to combine software and hardware, and that opens up a lot of business models. But you have to pick the right one to be able to survive. So that's lean hardware rules. Then this one's a little bit of a work in progress, but so you get the first version globally. What we call the hardware's death traps, and it mostly has to do with cash flow. So cash is super important, of course, for any company, any project, because when you run out of cash, basically you cannot do much more, unless you're very patient and you have like a day job. But if you're really like full-time already on a project, then you run out of cash, you're out of business. Obviously, the cash requirements for hardware tend to be higher than for software, just because you need the tooling, the manufacturing, putting orders in to the factory. So we kind of broke down like what happens to your cash and where you can get the money according to the development of your project. So there's cash and there's time. First phase, prototyping, then production, then scaling. So for the prototyping part, there's like 3 F's, so friends, family, and fools, who can basically fund you. Problems that you can very likely run out of money during the prototyping phase with that amount of cash, and you hit the first problem. At which point you might be able to find more money from angels or accelerators. There's more and more hardware accelerators. There's also general accelerators, I think, are a little bit less well positioned to help. And there's more and more angels who are interested in investing in hardware. Even in France, there's a few successful hardware companies who probably have a few people who have like spare cash to put into hardware projects. But then you still haven't shipped, so you are getting ready for production, but you probably don't have yet enough money to pay for all the tooling, the molds, and of course the pre-order to the factory. So you need to find more money, in which case what you can do is crowdfunding, for instance. And then while you have your cash for crowdfunding slowly running out, then you hit another point where you basically put the order, but you're not shipping yet, so you can't sell, because regular customers are not like crowdfunders. When they buy, they expect something within a week or two. They don't expect to wait a year for your product. So you have to wait. And until basically your production is ready, you're shipping, and you're ready to put new orders to the factory. And during that time, there's this difficult moment that we call the bridge of death, during which you might not have, even if there's demand for your product, you might not have the cash to just make them. There's a million people maybe waiting for your product, but because you need to pay the factory first, then you need to make the products, you need to ship them to the distributor put them in store, sell them, and sometimes they pay you 60 days after. You basically need to cover like 4 to 6 months of cash flow with no money. So during that time, you can find, to get out of the bridge of death or to cross it, a few things such as arrange pre-orders. There's a lot of legal requirements in some countries regarding pre-orders if you're not really ready. Sales, if you manage to do some shipments. In some cases, you can get purchase orders from retailers that help you finance your production. Banks can also give you money, lending based on existing, like previous sales or based on your purchase orders. They can advance some money. And VCs, VCs being the most expensive source of money because they take a chunk of your company. So the golden rule of lean hardware is to get to shipping the product. Santa Claus ships. And now I'm going to tell you a bit more about what we do and what it is to build with China. So just start with the one case, with Apple. So before, Asia was a good place to do things, to make products, because mostly it was cheaper. But in a recent, there was, in 2012, there was a dinner at the White House. There was Obama, Steve Jobs was still around, Tim Cook was there, and Obama asked them, what would it take to bring back manufacturing jobs to the US, to bring back like Apple production to the US? And they said, well, forget about it. It's no longer a viable option for most Apple products because there's not enough factories in the US, so they're lacking the ecosystem. Whereas factories in Asia can scale up and down much faster. The supply chains are basically much more integrated. You get the components, you get all the suppliers, you can get things delivered really fast. So that was also covered in the first presentation. It's just so much better that reproducing this ecosystem is almost impossible. I mean, it would take a really long time. So that's for a very big company. So what about a startup? Well, at Accelerator, we think that it also applies to startups. Obviously, you're not going to work with Foxconn on day one, but there's a lot of things you can do. So what we do is bring startups from around the world to Shenzhen, and we provide them with some cash, mentoring, and support. Basically, that allows them to find components all around because in the center of Shenzhen, you have like giant buildings with millions of components. You can just cross the street to go and buy them and test them like an hour later. So you can iterate on your prototypes a lot faster. You can visit the factories. You can meet the factory owners. You can be on the chain and look at what they do. So we have also sourcing suppliers. Basically, our plan is to get all the startups ready to manufacture, to launch like a crowdfunding campaign, and basically fund the next steps. So far, so we've been operating for a year and a half, almost 2 years. We had 29 startups go through. We ran 16 crowdfunding campaigns. The average stake was around $250,000. And we're just about to confirm the last startups for the next batch, which starts at the end of this month in Shenzhen. So another a bit more than 10 startups. So that's what we do. And mostly we cover from that like death trap to, let's say, half of the bridge of death. Because at that point, it really depends on the company, and it really depends on so many other things that that's not what the accelerator is meant for. But the accelerator is actually part of a larger fund that in some cases also invests in the company for crossing this. So that's what you do. Here's a few examples of the projects that we went through. So I think later you have a demo of the Spark Core, so that's actually cool because that's one of our startups. We had like a cooking device, so electronics, a quadcopter, like a brain wearable tech, and even a vibrator. So pretty wide range of electronics. As I mentioned earlier, pure hardware is not what we're looking for because we think it's just too difficult to maintain a good market position with pure hardware. So finding the right combination of hardware and software, finding the right positioning, establishing mindshare with like proper use of media, and finding how to do like timely distribution, scaling, and financing is what we think is important. So quick summary. So it's still core hardware for a reason, still hard. The cycles are much longer than software. You cannot just like build and ship like overnight. It doesn't work. There's no concept of MVP, so minimum viable product. If you're familiar with lean startup, it's quite a popular movement. That you can't do that with hardware. If you ship like a substandard hardware like product, bad ratings will kill you. It's going to be very, very difficult to recover. Which is also why I was hearing from the first presentation that you can sometimes try to go to Asia for low cost. Our view is that you'd better try to go for high quality at whatever the cost is. Because it's when you have low cost product, people are not so excited, you get bad reviews, it's difficult, you don't get so much demand. So whereas when you have high quality, people can bear high cost. There's a market for that. And it's also kind of nicer position to start from, we think at least. Compared to the software startups, it's still quite hard because the broader skill set you need to do a hardware startup, you need electrical, mechanical, software skills, you need design, product design, software design as well, and manufacturing, financing, distribution skills. And so when you have like just 2 or 3 founders, it's a little bit tricky to cover all those areas. Generally, our typical founding team has 1 software guy, 1 hardware guy, and a marketing person, and that's about it. And then they scale as they go. And obviously, there's also a lot more barriers to reach customers than just like slapping it on the App Store or the web. On the bright side, it's quite fun to do hardware. Lego was fun. Hardware is fun too. Better ecosystem. So we have now a better ecosystem than we ever had before, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's also less competitive than software because there's less companies, more barriers, and people just probably haven't caught up to the idea that you can actually build hardware startups. And actually, people pay for things, so it's quite nice to see that people are actually ready to pay. Voilà, merci beaucoup. And if you have any questions, yes.
Then you were showing us when your accelerator was sticking up. It was just at the end of when they were running out of money from the trip.
Yeah.
Where do you take up those people? I mean, you seem to be getting them all the way to Shenzhen, but where are they from?
So, okay, so I have to clarify a little bit. So we're not waiting for them to run out of money to get them into the accelerator. And it's a little bit, the frontiers are not so clear. Many of them, when I say prototyping, it looks like we just handle production, but in reality, we probably cover a good part of the prototyping. We get startups who are at the work-like prototype, meaning it's ugly, but it does the job. and we have them iterate until they get the look like and the design for manufacture. So we can actually go, like put you here. Now, before we took some startups at the concept level, but we don't do that anymore because we have so much applicants that we just take the ones that are more advanced. On top, the other part of your question was...
where are the applicants coming from?
Where are they coming from? So they're actually coming from all around the world. On this batch, we had hundreds of applicants. We take, we're probably going to have 12 this time. We're just confirming the last one, two.
Is it too late to apply? Or?
For this one, it's going to be a bit tricky, unless you have something absolutely outstanding. Well, you can feel free, go on the website, fill the form, or send me an email. But
when is the deadline?
That was a few weeks ago. But well, so we have two batches. We have 2 batches per year. So the next chance is in 6 months. Yes.
Yeah, you conclude your presentation saying that people pay for things, but in the process, I didn't see any market studies, or how can you be sure that the client will pay for these things?
I guess you can never be sure.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
what we can.
manage the risk with a
Yeah.
market study. You know?
So there's a few ways. First, you can look at market trends and what kind of market the product is trying to get into. You can look at what kind of other products on the market, what people pay for it. Then there's also a possibility to do what is called customer development research. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's like a lean startup concept by Steve Blank. So not the Eric Ries part, but the Steve Blank part. That means that you basically go to people that you identify more or less as your target demographics, and you say, okay, when was the last time you had such problem? And if they tell you, well, I never have such problem, you say, okay, you're not my customer. Then if enough people tell you, yeah, I have this problem, and you can ask them, okay, but how do you solve it today? And they explain to you, like, are you happy with the solution? And if they're not happy or not so happy, then you can see that maybe there's a market potential there. And then you can try to figure out how much they would pay.
That's a qualitative study, but what about the quantitative one? You know?
No, this is quantitative. You can interview 100 or 200 people. You'll have stats out of that.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course, a lot of qualitative feedback as well.
Okay.
But you can actually have statistics. I mean, if you go through the effort. But I guess when you're really early stage, a lot of it is kind of a gut feel. And feeling that there's enough people who are interested in that. Like in this current batch, we have so I cannot really give too much details, but we have a few companies that are targeting sports activities. So you're familiar with Nike Plus, I guess. Like there's a fuel band, there's Nike Plus for running. So there's a bunch of companies now trying to do Nike Plus for whatever else. And in one category of sports, we had like 3 companies pitching similar products. Nike Plus for like some sport. So in which case we're like, okay, is there enough practitioners of that sport? What would be the price they would accept to pay? And then we look at what are the teams, what stage they are, and these type of things. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but you need a business plan, not a project. To apply, for example. You need a business plan.
We never require people to send us a business plan. I mean, you need to have an idea of a strong idea of market. You need to have done some research, and you need to have some ideas how you're going to reach this market and what kind of price you can do. But we're so early in the projects, and we're so early in the investment that for us it's more about some kind of broad understanding of like, we kind of think there's a good enough market. We do a little bit of research to validate our feeling, but a lot of it is kind of guesstimates, I would say. Yeah. Yes.
What's the idea of the takeoff of B2B connected to the jet?
So we're a lot less into B2B because part of our model is to rely on crowdfunding to finance some steps. But in this upcoming batch, we have some B2B. Actually, Spark is a B2B company because they have the little like kits for the customers. That's kind of the consumer version. But they also have a licensing program with big electronics companies. So it's kind of a B2B thing. And yeah, I mean, from the applications I've seen for this current batch, was like hundreds of projects. There's like everything is going to be connected, like from water bottle to like it's everything. So many connected things. So I would assume that in the B2B, there's also a lot of connected projects. The problem for startups is that the cycles for B2B are much longer. So they can be. It can be the sales cycle to a business is generally longer than just putting a project on Kickstarter and getting customers. So if you have confidence doing a project, feel free. And we actually took some B2B projects, but we're less confident we can help them for the funding part, for the sales part. We can help them. We can help put them in front of investors. But for the sales, they will have to, figure it out. So in some cases, there's some founders who have like knowledge about an industry, and they already met a bunch of potential customers, and they come to us and they say, "Well, we know this industry really well. We know all the people who actually could buy our stuff, and we think there's a market." And like the first company we confirmed for this batch, the upcoming batch of startups, is actually B2B. They have this robot that they already understand they can sell because they understand exactly how much saving it represents for the customers. So that's an example.
And then you can have the customer pay for the development.
Well, ideally, yes. Ideally, yes. If you can do that, that's great. But not always, right?
What do you charge? What's the counterpart for being part of your program?
So the program, so the deal we offer is basically $25,000 and the whole program and tuition and support until you get to production for 6% of the company, which is like
6%.
Yeah, fairly standard for accelerators. And we believe that basically the cash part is not the most important. It's really all the support you get that will save you so much time and so much headaches. Because you're going to be in Shenzhen for 4 months. We're going to help you find really good factories to work with. You're going to be able to basically iterate on your prototype, get it ready, and get it have a clear communication channel, understand how the people work. So all the troubles you heard in the first part, we solve a lot of them by being in Shenzhen, and we solve also part of them by having worked with so many factories and having people to support what you're doing, basically. So,
about manufacturing in the US, Google does that now with the Motorola and the Moto G, and it's a pretty good phone. So
yeah, obviously, I mean,
this could be sustainable. Or
I think so too. So I'm not saying that it's not totally. I'm not saying it's totally impossible to manufacture in whatever country. Like there's also a bunch of factories in Mexico that are picking up quite well. The difference is that you have all the components, all the sourcing, all the supply chain that's really well integrated in China, whereas less so even in the US, even for Motorola.
Essaye de faire des tissus en France, essaye de faire des vêtements en France. Et la réponse que tu auras de tous les gens, ce sera bon, on peut faire des trucs de qualité, on peut faire des trucs de luxe, mais tu es obligé d'être au Pakistan ou en Inde parce qu'ils ont tous les tissus. C'est exactement le même problème.
Well, but the trend is rather to relocalize, no?
Well, that's what the politicians are telling you. And I guess you should be buying and voting for them, for whoever wants to do that. But it's going to be 20 years now, right?
I mean, if you want to read more about it, there was this article, I think maybe New York Times, so about this dinner on the whole story about like China manufacturing and jobs and things. And basically what Apple was also saying is that US doesn't produce enough people to work those jobs in the factories and to manage the people who work the factory lines. Whereas China, overnight, can basically put like 8,000 people on a new line of product, in just because it just wake them up in the dorm. So that's a difference. Yes?
I understand the ecosystem, manufacturing ecosystem in China is huge. The salaries in countries like Vietnam are out the cost of salaries in China. Are some Chinese factory owners starting branches, manufacturing branches in such countries as Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia? Nearby countries?
I'm trying to find them. There's a little bit of manufacturing that's moving, but mostly for low tech products. Because labor cost, as written here, is actually a minimal factor in the case of technology products. So they're moving the easy stuff. That's it. Yes.
What countries are companies are positioned, large companies that are positioned to take advantage of the Internet of Things? And for example, the only one I can think of offhand is Belkin.
Mm-hmm.
But what others are there out there that you think are could have?
Well, almost. I mean, car manufacturers, utility companies,
People who actually
appliances, everybody.
Small products.
Mm-hmm.
Zillions of small products. I think Belkin is headed that way.
But Belkin, it's not very high-tech products, actually. It's mostly like cases and stuff like that. And a little bit like some kind of simple electronics, right?
Yeah, they actually are beginning to get into it.
So, I mean, I think there's opportunities to build connected devices and connected things for almost anything. Like, I'm trying to find an example that wouldn't be one of the startups we just picked up, but I mean, you could automate so many things, you could monitor so many things, you could put sensors into anything.
What large companies are actually moving in this direction of producing Internet of Things devices?
Well, we can maybe ask the guys who work here, like what kind of clients you work with.
I think that in France, Terraillon is moving into this space. They used to build weight scales, or kitchen scales.
When you're doing projects with connected devices, I don't know how much you can talk about it.
Yeah, we're working with connected devices, but we mostly work for prototypes or really small series, maybe hundreds of devices.
Okay, so it's not large scale.
It's really more connected device as a communication method.
Okay, that's mostly for PR at that stage.
Yes.
Okay. Yes?
Out of the batch, how many companies did you take on all the batches you have had so far in the 2 years? How many companies have you essentially got into your program?
You mean among all the applications we got?
Yeah, I mean the ones that are now in the programs and the ones that are about to be coming into the program.
So we had 29 who already completed the program, and we have another 12 coming in, so that will be about 40.
And how many of them are from Europe, and how many of them are kind of from France?
So in the previous batches, we had about half from the US, and we had others from Europe, Asia, a little bit South America.
And you are from Shenzhen? Do you have people from Shenzhen?
We had about 1 or 2 Chinese companies per batch, not necessarily from Shenzhen.
From Shanghai?
Shanghai, Beijing, Wuhan, wherever. I'm not exactly sure like which city, because I mean, also there's generally more than one founder, so it's not depends where he's born, right? So, well, but for us it doesn't make any difference whether you're from one country or another. There's one thing that we still think a little bit about, is that if you build a company and you don't have no idea how to address the US market, you're less exciting than a similar company who would know how to do it.
Okay.
So even if we would like more like US people who have knowledge of US market so that they know how to address it, because the biggest market for all those type of things. Right. In practice, we had a number of applicants from the US, but in this current batch, it's less than half, maybe a quarter. I'm not even sure. I have to check the.
How many from Europe, and how many? What's the biggest percentage? What's the?
I think we had some stats. I think it was like 50%, 50 US, and about half Europe, quarter Europe, quarter rest of the world.
And when you say quarter Europe, how many of them are from Anglo-Saxon countries?
Don't have that in mind. I don't remember. Sorry.
You know,
but Anglo-Saxon country. I mean, Europe. There's only UK, Ireland. Other than that, it's all. I mean, we have companies from like Germany.
Well, I'd say where people speak English better most of the time. You know, the Nordic countries. They're not Anglo-Saxons, but
yeah,
French-wise, it's mostly
I haven't.
the people
I
who
don't
speak
have
English
that
better.
stat in mind. Sorry.
Okay.
Do you also help matchmaking? Which
What do you
is
mean?
helping software people or software plus hardware people meet the marketing guy in the US?
In some cases, we can support a little bit, but we need teams that can already build a product together.
Right.
So if they only need marketing, if they're lacking marketing, then
Yeah.
maybe we can like help them like figure out how to find one. But overall, I mean, mostly taking product teams.
How long did it first spend on the prototype before I think
So it's very variable. So we have one company we're talking with at the moment. They spent 4 years on the prototype. We think it's a little bit too long. And they also think it's a little bit too long. But the reason they spent that much time is because they had very little support and they didn't know how to do it. So we think we can shorten that amount of time a lot. In some cases, we have companies who just started, I don't know, just maybe 6 months prior. It doesn't really matter, but I would think that if it took you a really short time, I don't know, 3 weeks to do a prototype, it's very likely it's not very defendable because I mean there's no tech, there's no. I mean the hardware part is not necessarily very difficult, but even to do like software that's actually not too easy to replicate, you need time. So I would say the sweet spot is probably a healthy sweet spot is probably like 6 months to a year and a half of prototyping. Really depends, because some people start like as a side project, not full time, and then they get serious, and then they spend like 6 months to a year seriously, and then they realize like, okay, we need to go to China now to make it. So it varies. Okay, so if you have more questions.